In the heart of Nova Lumina's Grand Bazaar, where crystal spires pierced the violet sky and 3 moons cast their ethereal glow, sat an enormous clay vessel that most passers-by mistook for an abandoned relic. Its weathered surface bore intricate patterns that seemed to shift in the changing light, though few bothered to look closely enough to notice. This peculiar vessel was home to Theron Vale, once the most decorated operative of the Terran Special Forces, now content to live a life of deliberate simplicity. Theron lounged at the mouth of his vessel, his bronzed skin glistening in the morning light. His long dark hair was tied back in a neat braid, and his only concession to clothing was a pair of simple linen pants. The local luminari, with their translucent skin that caught and reflected light like living prisms, had grown accustomed to the eccentric human who'd taken up residence in their marketplace 2 years ago. The clay vessel, standing nearly 12 feet tall, had appeared mysteriously in the bazaar the same night Theron arrived. No one questioned its presence, just as no one questioned how a man of his reputation chose to live in what appeared to be little more than an oversized pot. The Luminari were a people of light and wisdom, and they recognized that sometimes the simplest questions had the most complex answers. A commotion near the spice merchant stall drew Theron's attention. 2 young Luminari children had knocked over a display of rare stellar spices, their crystalline tears refracting rainbow patterns across the cobblestones. Without hesitation, Theron rose and made his way to the scene, his movements carrying the fluid grace of a practiced warrior. Now, he said, kneeling beside the children. Let's see what we can salvage. His hands moved with surprising gentleness as he helped gather the spilled spices, using static fields from a small device on his wrist to separate different varieties from the mixed pile. The merchant, initially furious, softened at the sight of the human's intervention. It wasn't the first time Theron had helped resolve a marketplace dispute, and it wouldn't be the last. His presence had become something of a stabilizing force in the bazaar, though he never sought recognition for his actions. What Theron didn't notice, as he calmed the children and restored order to the stall, was the figure watching from the shadows of a crystal archway. Queen Celaris of the Luminari observed the scene with keen interest, her form cloaked in a shimmer weave that dampened her natural radiance. Unlike her subjects, whose light-manipulating abilities manifested in gentle glows and subtle refractions, Celaris blazed like a newborn star. Even with the cloak, she struggled to contain the power that marked her as ruler of Nova Lumina. She had heard tales of the human in the clay vessel, of course. Stories of his quiet interventions in marketplace disputes, his mysterious past, and his peculiar choice of dwelling had reached even the highest spires of her crystal palace. But seeing him in person, witnessing the natural authority he commanded without any desire for recognition, intrigued her in ways she hadn't expected. As Theron returned to his vessel, Celaris made a decision. She stepped from the shadows, her presence immediately drawing gasps and bows from nearby merchants and shoppers. The shimmerweave cloak fell away, revealing her true glory. Her skin emanated pure white light, while her hair flowed like liquid starlight, creating coronas of color wherever her gaze fell. Theron, sensing the sudden shift in the marketplace's atmosphere, turned to find himself face to face with the Queen of Nova Lumina. He didn't bow. Instead, he offered a casual salute, as if greeting an old friend rather than the most powerful being on the planet. "You're blocking my light, your radiance," he said, a hint of amusement in his deep voice. Celaris's laugh, when it came, sounded like crystal wind chimes in a summer breeze. "Of all the responses I've received upon meeting someone for the first time, that may be the most unique." She moved closer, studying him with eyes that held the spectrum of 1,000 stars. "You've become quite the topic of discussion in my court, Theron Vale." "All good things, I hope," he replied, settling back against his vessel. "Though I can't imagine what's so interesting about a man and his pot. Perhaps it's the mystery of why a former Terran Special Forces operative, decorated with the Stellar Cross for Valor, would choose to live in a clay vessel in a foreign marketplace." Her words carried no judgment, only genuine curiosity. Theron's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his steel-gray eyes. Perhaps some questions are better left unanswered, Your Radiance. Then let me ask one that demands an answer, Celara said, her light pulsing slightly brighter. My advisors tell me you've helped resolve numerous conflicts in the bazaar, prevented at least 3 potential diplomatic incidents, and even saved a group of children from a collapsed building last month. Yet you've never once sought reward or recognition. Why? Simple life, simple pleasures, Theron shrugged. Recognition tends to complicate things. Celaris moved closer, her radiance casting intricate patterns across the surface of his clay vessel. Then let me complicate things, just this once. Name your wish, Theron Vale. Anything within my power to grant is yours. The marketplace had gone silent, every eye fixed on the unusual tableau of the radiant queen and the casual human before his clay home. Theron studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he spoke. If you're offering, Your Radiance, I wouldn't mind if you'd shift about 3 steps to the right. You're still blocking my light. The silence in the marketplace grew deeper, if possible. No one had ever responded to the Queen's generosity with such an apparently dismissive request. But Celaris didn't appear offended. Instead, her light flickered with what might have been amusement as she gracefully moved 3 steps to the right. Better? She asked, a smile playing at the corners of her luminescent lips. Much appreciated, Theron replied, closing his eyes and settling back to soak in the restored sunlight. What neither of them knew in that moment was that this peculiar exchange would mark the beginning of something far more significant than either could imagine. The clay vessel that stood witness to their meeting held secrets of its own, secrets that would soon enough draw both the former warrior and the radiant queen into an adventure that would shake the foundations of Nova Lumina itself. As Celaris departed, her light leaving trailing patterns in the air behind her, Theron opened one eye to watch her go. The patterns on his clay vessel shifted ever so slightly, responding to something no one else seemed to notice. The game, as they said in his former line of work, was about to begin. The days following Queen Celaris's visit to the marketplace brought unexpected changes to Theron's carefully constructed routine. The Queen began appearing regularly in the bazaar, sometimes in her full regalia, other times cloaked in shimmer weave that did little to hide her radiant nature. She would sit near his vessel, sharing conversations that grew increasingly personal as the twin suns traced their path across Nova Lumina's violet sky. Your disguise needs work, Theron commented one morning as Celaris approached, her attempt at blending in with common merchants failing spectacularly. You still walk like every step is claiming territory. Perhaps you could teach me to slouch as magnificently as you do, she replied, settling gracefully beside his vessel. Her light dimmed to a soft glow, a trick she'd been practicing to draw less attention. 15 years of military precision earned me the right to perfect the art of lounging, he said, shifting to make space for her. Though I notice you've mastered the art of not blocking my light. I'm a quick study. Her smile carried the brightness of distant stars. Unlike some humans who take years to learn proper court etiquette. Their banter had become a daily ritual, drawing curious glances from passing citizens. The sight of their radiant queen sitting cross-legged beside a clay vessel, engaging in playful conversation with a half-dressed human, had become the subject of endless speculation throughout Nova Lumina. Tell me something true, Theron, Celaris said one afternoon, her tone turning serious. What really brought you here? Your military record speaks of remarkable achievements, yet you chose this. She gestured to the clay vessel. Theron was quiet for a long moment, his steel-gray eyes distant. Did you know, he finally said, that during the Nexus War, I commanded a unit of 50 of the finest soldiers humanity had to offer? His voice carried the weight of memories he usually kept buried. We were called the Phantom Division. Specialized in impossible missions, the kind that officially never happened. Celaris remained silent, sensing the importance of this rare moment of openness. Our last mission was supposed to be simple. Extract a high-value target from a supposedly abandoned research facility. His jaw tightened. Intel was wrong. The facility was a trap, designed to lure in exactly the kind of unit we were. Lost 38 good people that day, trying to shut down what turned out to be a doomsday device that would have destroyed 3 systems. But you succeeded, Solaris said softly, her light pulsing in sympathy. At a cost. Theron's hand unconsciously traced one of the patterns on his vessel. After that, I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't keep making decisions that determined who lived and who died. Needed something simpler. And you found it here, in a clay vessel in my marketplace. There was no judgment in her voice, only understanding. Found more than that, he said, his eyes meeting hers. Found peace. Most days, anyway. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden dimming of the ambient light. Both looked up to see a massive shadow passing over the marketplace, a ship entering Nova Lumina's atmosphere, its design speaking of power and aggression. The Obsidian Dominion, Solaris breathed, her light flickering with concern. They weren't due to arrive for another week. Theron's posture shifted subtly, military training reasserting itself as he analyzed the vessel above. Friends of yours? Hardly. Her voice carried an edge he hadn't heard before. They've been pushing for an alliance, one that would give them access to our light manipulation technology. Their diplomatic delegation arrives early, it seems. Diplomatic? Theron's tone suggested he believed otherwise. That's an Eclipse-class warship up there, your Radiance. Not exactly standard for diplomatic missions. Before Solaris could respond, both noticed something strange. The patterns on Theron's clay vessel had begun to shift more actively, forming complex geometries that seemed to respond to the ship's presence. A faint humming emanated from within, barely perceptible but impossible to ignore. Theron, Solaris said carefully, how much do you know about this vessel? Found it in the ruins of that research facility, he admitted, watching the patterns with growing concern. It was the only thing left intact after the explosion. Something about it, called to me. Followed me here, actually. Appeared wherever I tried to settle until I stopped running. The humming grew stronger as the Obsidian Dominion's ship moved to dock at the Crystal Spaceport. The patterns on the vessel now pulsed with a rhythm that matched Solaris's natural luminescence, creating an otherworldly harmony between the ancient clay and her living light. I don't suppose, she said, rising to her feet, this would be a good time to tell you that our archaeologists have found references to a legendary artifact in our oldest records? One that supposedly combined the power of light and shadow to protect our world in ancient times? Theron looked at his home of 2 years with new eyes. Let me guess, it was described as a clay vessel? One that would choose its guardian, she confirmed, her light brightening with excitement and apprehension. A guardian who would appear when Nova Lumina needed them most. Above them, the Obsidian Dominion's ship settled into orbit, its shadow casting the marketplace into artificial twilight. The vessel's humming reached a crescendo, and for a brief moment, the patterns aligned to form what looked like a star map, with Nova Lumina at its center. Well, Theron said, standing to his full height, his casual demeanor replaced by something more purposeful, looks like my simple life just got complicated. He offered his hand to Solaris. Care to help me figure out what other secrets this pot's been keeping? Her luminescent fingers intertwined with his, light and shadow meeting in perfect balance. I thought you'd never ask. As they stood together before the ancient vessel, neither could have predicted how their next steps would reshape not just their lives, but the destiny of Nova Lumina itself. The game had indeed begun, and the stakes were higher than either of them could have imagined. Deep within the archives beneath Nova Lumina's crystal palace, Theron and Solaris pored over ancient texts that seemed to glow with their own inner light. The Queen's radiance illuminated scrolls that hadn't seen light in centuries, while Theron traced the familiar patterns from his vessel in the aged illustrations before them. Here, Solaris said, her finger hovering over a diagram that perfectly matched the vessel's current configuration. The Nexus Chalice, they called it. created by the ancestral luminary to harness both light and shadow in perfect balance. Explains why it responded to both of us, Theron mused, studying the intricate descriptions. The archive's crystalline walls reflected their images back at them, the radiant queen and the former warrior, an unlikely pair united by ancient mystery. Their research was interrupted by the arrival of royal advisor Darius, his crystalline form dimmed with concern. Your Radiance, the Obsidian Dominion's delegation demands an immediate audience. Lord Commander Ravaxis grows, impatient. Solaris's light pulsed with irritation. Tell them. They know about the vessel, Darius cut in, his voice tight. Somehow, they know. Theron's expression hardened. Not somehow. They've known all along. He pulled out a small device from his pocket, displaying a holographic image of the research facility where he'd lost his team. The trap wasn't just for us. They were searching for something specific. The pieces began falling into place. The seemingly random attacks, the strategic positioning of the facility, the timing of the Dominion's arrival, it had all been orchestrated to track down the Nexus Chalice. We should move the vessel to the palace, Darius suggested. Our defenses. No, Theron and Solaris said simultaneously. They shared a look of understanding. The marketplace is where it chose to stop, Theron explained. Where it's meant to be. Rising from the archive table, Solaris's light grew brighter with determination. Then we'll meet them there. On our terms. The marketplace had transformed in their absence. The Obsidian Dominion's delegates had positioned themselves around the vessel, their armor absorbing light like black holes against Nova Lumina's vibrant landscape. Lord Commander Ravaxis stood at their center, his obsidian armor etched with patterns that seemed to consume any light that touched them. Queen Solaris, Ravaxis's voice carried the cold of deep space. How convenient that you arrive with the vessel's current occupant. Careful, Commander, Theron's casual tone belied the tension in his stance. Some might think you're more interested in my housing situation than proper diplomatic relations. Ravaxis's laugh held no warmth. Always deflecting with humor, aren't you, Vale? Just as you did during the facility raid. Though I must admit, your decision to make the vessel your home was unexpected. It made tracking you considerably easier. The Nexus Chalice belongs to Nova Lumina, Solaris declared, her radiance intensifying. It chose its guardian freely. Chose? Ravaxis scoffed. This relic of power chose a human who lives like a beggar? The Obsidian Dominion has spent millennia preparing to harness its power. We will not be denied by an accident of fate. The vessel's patterns began to shift more rapidly now, responding to the growing tension. Streams of light from Solaris's form seemed to weave themselves into the ancient clay, while shadows deepened in its grooves, creating an effect that made the vessel appear to breathe. You still don't understand, Theron said, moving closer to his home. It's not about harnessing power. It's about balance. As if in response to his words, the vessel's patterns aligned into a new configuration. Suddenly, the air was filled with projections, star maps, ancient battles, and scenes from across the galaxy. At the center of each image was Nova Lumina, shining like a beacon. The ancestral luminary didn't create a weapon, Solaris breathed, understanding dawning in her luminescent eyes. They created a nexus point, a way to maintain balance across entire systems. And now it will serve its true purpose, Ravaxis declared. He raised his hand, and his soldiers moved forward, weapons charged. The time of light is over. The Dominion will bring the shadow that the galaxy needs. The vessel's humming grew louder, and Theron felt something he'd never experienced before, a connection, not just to the clay that had been his home, but to every shadow and light source in the marketplace. He could sense Solaris too, her radiance intertwining with the vessel's energy. You're right about one thing, Theron said, placing his hand on the vessel's surface. It is time for it to serve its purpose. He looked at Solaris. Together? She moved to his side, her light merging with the vessel's patterns. Together. As Ravaxis's forces advanced, the Nexus chalice began to transform. Its clay surface became translucent, revealing intricate mechanisms that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. Light and shadow danced through its structure, creating a display of power that made even the obsidian soldiers pause. "This is your final warning," Stellaris announced, her voice carrying the authority of ages. "The Nexus chalice has chosen its path. Leave Nova Lumina in peace." Ravaxis's response was to fire the first shot, a beam of pure darkness aimed directly at the vessel. But as the energy reached them, something extraordinary happened. The vessel absorbed the attack, its patterns redistributing the dark energy and transforming it into a harmonic balance of light and shadow. The battle for Nova Lumina's future was about to begin, and at its heart stood a former soldier who'd sought simplicity, a queen who commanded light itself, and an ancient artifact that had been waiting for precisely this moment. In the violet sky above, all three moons aligned, and the marketplace of Nova Lumina became the stage for a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of a world, but the balance of power across the galaxy itself. The marketplace erupted into chaos as the Obsidian Dominion's forces launched their assault. Dark energy weapons carved paths through the air, their beams seeking to overwhelm the Nexus Chalice's defenses. Citizens fled for safety, their crystalline forms casting fractured light patterns in their wake. Theron's military training merged seamlessly with his newfound connection to the vessel. Each touch on its surface redirected enemy fire, transforming deadly energy into harmonious patterns of light and shadow that spread protective barriers throughout the marketplace. "The vessel isn't just defending," he called to Stellaris, who stood beside him, her radiance pulsing in sync with the chalice's rhythms. "It's teaching us how to use it." Stellaris nodded, her hands weaving complex patterns in the air. Where her light met the vessel's energy, new defensive structures materialized, bridges of pure light spanning between market stalls, shields of balanced energy protecting civilian evacuation routes. Lord Commander Ravaxis strode forward, his obsidian armor absorbing all light around him. "Impressive parlor tricks," he sneered, drawing a weapon that seemed to be carved from pure darkness. "But you've barely glimpsed the true potential of power." The commander's weapon discharged a beam of such intense darkness that it created a vacuum of light in its path. Theron moved instinctively, placing himself between the attack and Stellaris, his hand pressed against the vessel's surface. Instead of attempting to block the beam, he let it flow through him into the chalice. "You're right," Theron grunted, muscles straining as he guided the dark energy. "We're just learning. But sometimes the best lessons come under pressure." The vessel hummed, its patterns shifting faster than ever before. The absorbed darkness began to transform, mixing with Stellaris's light until it created something entirely new, a spectrum of energy that existed between shadow and radiance. "Impossible," Ravaxis breathed, watching as his attack was not just neutralized but transformed. Stellaris moved closer to Theron, her shoulder brushing against his. "The ancient texts spoke of harmony," she said, her voice carrying the wisdom of her ancestors. "Not dominance. Not control. Balance." Around them, the marketplace had become a battlefield of light and shadow. Obsidian soldiers found their weapons malfunctioning as the vessel's influence spread, creating zones where darkness and light existed in perfect equilibrium. Some troops, witnessing the transformation of their attacks into beautiful displays of balanced energy, began to lower their weapons. But Ravaxis wasn't finished. He activated a device on his armor, and suddenly the sky above Nova Lumina darkened. The massive obsidian warship had moved into position, its shadow core engines powering up for a planetary strike. "If we cannot possess the chalice," Ravaxis declared, "then none shall have it. Your precious marketplace will be the epicenter of Nova Lumina's devastation." Theron felt the vessel pulse beneath his hands, experiencing not just its power but its purpose. Memories flooded through him, not his own, but those of ancient guardians who had once wielded this power. He saw civilizations rise and fall, watched as balance was maintained across galaxies, understood finally why the vessel had chosen him. "Solaris," he said softly, turning to meet her radiant gaze. "I know what we need to do." She nodded, having received the same vision. The ancestral luminary designed it for exactly this moment. Together, they placed their hands on opposite sides of the vessel. Theron's natural affinity for shadow and Solaris's command of light created a circuit of power that had not been seen in millennia. The Nexus chalice began to transform, its clay surface becoming transparent, revealing the cosmic machinery within. "By the void," one of the obsidian soldiers whispered, lowering his weapon in awe. Above them, the warship's shadow core reached critical power. Dark energy began to rain down on Nova Lumina, threatening to extinguish all light. But where the darkness fell, it met something unexpected, a rising column of perfectly balanced energy, emanating from the marketplace. The Nexus chalice lifted from its resting place for the first time in 2 years, suspended between Theron and Solaris. Their combined energy flowed through it, creating a phenomenon that would be recorded in Nova Luminan history for generations to come. Light and shadow began to dance around them in a double helix, spreading outward from the marketplace in waves. Where these waves touched the obsidian warship's attack, harmony was enforced. Dark energy weapons became useless as their fundamental nature was brought into balance with the light they sought to extinguish. "You see, Commander," Theron said, his voice carrying the weight of newfound understanding, "power isn't about domination. It's about finding the balance within the chaos." Solaris's light pulsed in agreement, her energy intertwining with his through the vessel. "Your shadow is not evil, Ravaxis, just as my light is not inherently good. They are two parts of the same whole." The warship's attack faltered as its shadow core encountered energies it couldn't overcome. Systems began to fail as the balance enforced by the Nexus chalice spread throughout its structure. Ravaxis watched in disbelief as his ultimate weapon was rendered harmless, transformed into another source of the harmony he had sought to destroy. "You're wrong," Ravaxis snarled, raising his weapon for one final attack. "There is only power in those too weak to seek it." But as he fired, something extraordinary happened. The beam from his weapon split into its fundamental elements, light and shadow, each seeking its natural state of balance. The marketplace filled with an aurora of energy, a testament to the true nature of the universe's power. In that moment, as light and shadow found their harmony, Theron and Solaris stood as living proof of what the ancestral luminari had known ages ago, that the greatest power comes not from dominance of one force over another, but from the beautiful, delicate, and eternal dance between them.